Steve, nice to meet you.
Hi, Kevin. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks for coming to our little workshop here. Not often we have a doctor in the house, but in this case, it's perfect, a doctor of audiology, because we are exposed to loud noises all of the time on the job site. What are the effects? How does it work? What's going on?
Yeah, so there are many different types of hearing losses and causes of hearing loss. But like you said, what we're talking about here is what's known as sound-induced hearing loss, and more specifically, sound-induced hearing disorders. And I make that distinction because unfortunately with hazardous sound exposure, it's generally a package deal where you don't just get hearing loss. Not that that's trivial or something that you can shrug off, but we also get other issues such as tinnitus or tinnitus, which is a ringing or buzzing noise that generates inside our head, not from the world.
I know it well.
Yeah, I have it too. But what's actually causing the injury is we have these specialized cells inside of our ears, and there's around 15,000 of them per ear. And that's all we get. They do not repair themselves, they do not heal, and as of right now, we don't have any pharmaceutical or medication that can help repair those cells. They're working on it, but we're not there yet.
All right, so let's talk about the damage, because not all noises are the same, right? They're not all as bad or as good as other noises.
Very true, and that's one of the things that makes this concept of just sound exposure difficult, because hazardous music exposure is a little bit different than hazardous like construction or tool sounds, and even within, power tools, there are differences between a table saw and a hammer.
Right, and you measure sound by?
So we use decibel, or that's the unit of measure for sound, and the range of loudnesses that we can perceive is something that's difficult to wrap your head around. So we use a decibel scale to take this very broad range and condense it into roughly a 0 to 120 decibel scale. So 0 dB SPL is generally regarded as the threshold of hearing. So the softest sound most people can hear before we damage our ears. And that scale goes up to around 120, 130 decibels, and that's known as the threshold of pain.
Oh, interesting.
Now, NIOSH, which is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, and they're the ones that do all of the research around occupational noise exposure, they would say you have 15 minutes, only 15 minutes before you have fully exhausted your system.
That's a big difference, and it's that 15-point change from 85 to 100.
Absolutely.
Before we get into hearing protection, is there a way that you can demonstrate to us what the levels are for different tools? Because we don't just use something like this, we use all types of tools. And I'm just wondering, who are the big offenders?
Sure, so the easiest way to do this is with a sound level meter. And fortunately nowadays, everyone has, I guess, the power to have a sound level meter because there are free apps for your phone.
Oh, really?
So we can use the NIOSH SLM app, which comes from the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And it's a very educational app. It works well with iOS, and we can use that to get a rough sense of all the tools around us. It's of course not as accurate as a scientific model, but it's something we all have access to.
Well, if you've got the phone with the app, we got the tool. So
I do.
You break that out, I'll start grabbing some stuff. Let's see what we should start with.
All right, so let's take a listen to a miter saw.
Okay. And why are you all the way up there?
I'm just trying to get it closer to my ears since that's where we're hearing. It's a good place to measure.
Okay. So let's see what we got. How do we do?
So some measurements over 100 decibels.
Really?
Yeah.
Damage.
Yeah, well, around 15 minutes is what you would have exposed to sounds like that before you hit your daily dose. Now let's try a drill.
I know how loud the impact drivers are, but just a regular drill driver, I'm curious to see what you get.
So we're around 85, 86 decibels.
So use it for an entire day, you've used up your allotment.
Right, which we're generally not going to be drilling the whole day, but that combined with everything else, it could definitely add up. So even a hammer is louder than you might think.
Let's find out. Ready?
Yeah,
so bad.
We got some peaks up above 120 decibels. And again, that's at a point where you should really never be exposed to that sound. And it's worth noting that this is just a free app. It's a cell phone. It's not perfectly accurate, but it does go to show how loud something as seemingly trivial as a hammer is.
That's the most frightening thing, because I often think of hearing damage from that. I rarely am actually wearing hearing protection just to hammer away.
Absolutely.
So that's a disappointing number to see.
Yeah, I think we've all said that, like, oh, I'm just hammering a nail, I don't need to wear hearing protection. But in reality, you do, because that sudden burst of energy can also be even more hazardous than a loud, continuous sound.
So let's talk about hearing protection. A lot of different kinds out there. You got preferences?
Sure. Well, nowadays, there are many fantastic earplugs that we can use, and it kind of comes down to what you're using them for and then what fits your ears. So over-the-ear or earmuff style hearing protection like this works very well because it tends to offer more consistent sound protection.
Okay.
And even ones like this offer an active element to the noise reduction, so you can still hear people speak and then they will drop the volume when a loud sound occurs.
It's a really nice feature.
Yeah.
Okay.
Our typical foam earplugs, they work very well. The one difficulty with them is people tend to get them in their ears improperly. And that's what you'll see, where they're sticking in, doing almost nothing.
Just hanging out.
That's right.
Not much. So in terms of like technical efficacy, are these similar if they were both worn properly?
Yeah, so they have a similar noise reduction rating, or NRR, if worn properly. And you're doing it right now where you generally have to roll them down very thin, pull your ear back and up, and insert it to the point where you almost don't even see the earplug sticking out.
Right. And then let it expand a little bit.
Right, let it expand.
But a lot of people don't do that, or they don't do it for very long.
That's right. And one other issue with earplugs like that is they're passive, so they're going to bring down all sounds equally. And then if you go to communicate with someone, ask someone for a drink at the bar, or someone speaks to you, you can't hear them, so you tend to take them out. So that's where newer hearing protection, like some advanced earbuds and the earmuffs that we talked about, that offer an active element where you can still hear someone speak, and then they reduce the volume when it occurs.
So the things that we're using to listen to our podcasts and our music, you're saying could be used effectively in the workshop?
Actually, yes. Yeah, I've used it in the workshop. I've used it at very loud rock concerts and walked away without any ringing, buzzing, or fuzziness in my ears.
And I don't recognize this one. What's going on there?
So this is just a case. You know, there's so many caveats with hearing protection, and I tend to think the best earplug is the one you are actually going to wear. And since most people don't obsess over hearing like audiologists do, it's very easy to leave them at home while you're going out. So the way to mitigate that and make sure that you always are ready to protect your ears is to just get a metal keychain carrying case, put your $20 to $40 earplugs in there, and then you'll always have them with you, whether you go to a festival, there's a band, or a loud restaurant.
So the best hearing protection is the hearing protection you have and the one you wear.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Doctor. We appreciate the info.
Thanks for having me on the show.
You got it. Thanks for watching. This Old House has got a video for just about every home improvement project, so be sure to check out the others. And if you like what you see, click on the subscribe button to make sure that you get our newest videos right in your feed.